that are set up in the Americas, EMEA, and Asia Pac. We have been meeting about every 3 weeks. Locally, and locally for us is all of North and South America. We have liaisons that talk to all 96 chapters in the region, hopefully soon number 97 in Jamaica, I hear. We're also responsible for the liaisons for the 16 councils and 6 communities of IFMA. So what have we been talking about? What have we been hearing as we've evolved with continued upheaval? Has been, I think, very open. We've shared a lot of best practices. We continue to share best practices. Thinking about some of the specifics of the Caribbean geography versus what we just went through in the U.S. With Hurricane Sally. There's a lot of good comparables. So we had economic strife. We had massive flooding, 500,000 people without power, and COVID hotspots, some of the largest COVID hotspots in our country. We have similar issues going on in Northern California right now. Our wine country is burning, record wildfires, record unemployment, on top of COVID. So the migration of people and trying to deal with that, whether you're a facility manager, focused on corporate facilities where everyone is kind of told to go home, but that's not the whole story. Critical infrastructure still needs to be managed. Utilities need to still be open. Hospitals need to still be open. The government still operates. Manufacturing is not stopped. So there's 2 sides to, I think, how the conversations have gone and the realities have gone with all our governments saying, go home, stay home. Well, that's nice for office workers, white collar workers, but for probably 40% of our population, that's not true. That's not true at all. I think from IFMA's perspective, what has been produced throughout the entire COVID series, if you haven't checked out the IFMA website, whether you remember or not, is completely free. There's a library of resources that are really attempted to be global, not just US focused, that are playbooks, checklists, vertically focused on what kind of facilities do you run? I mean, corporate facilities is one thing, but if you're in healthcare or in manufacturing or transportation, those playbooks, those checklists, and those resources have been tailored and continue to evolve to support the association, support the profession. And I think if you haven't taken advantage of those, I would. So happy to field any questions and look forward to the rest of today's conversation.
All right, thanks, Ted. And I'm still learning how to do spotlights and take off spotlights and so on. Okay, give me 2 seconds. They always say when you have technical issues, just take your time and figure it out. All right, maybe not. Okay, that's how I do it. Okay, thanks, Ted. I appreciate that. Nice opening comments. You seem to have as I say, everything swirling around you in your neck of the woods. I'm gonna now move over to Sandra, Miss Sandra Logan, our Jamaican champion, hopefully soon to be new president of Jamaica chapter of IFMA. I'm certainly going to so I'll hand it over to you, Sandra.
Oh, I'm getting some feedback. Okay. Hello, everyone. Greetings from the beautiful island of Jamaica, one of the beautiful Caribbean islands. Really happy to be here and just be speaking about the upheaval and the challenges of Jamaica, our experiences. the fact of the matter is, Caribbean islands or the US, other countries, our challenges are basically similar, right? However, as FMs, we continue to persevere, right? We have had many challenges, in terms of upheaval, because we are experiencing the hurricane season. Of course, each time you hear of a report that there is a hurricane forming, you started to get a little bit, antsy about it. But as FM, if we have done our planning in terms of ensuring that our buildings are resilient enough to sustain and to withstand high winds, flooding, and whatever disaster that comes our way, then we should be in good stead. Because the last thing we want to happen is that while there's a hurricane and you're preparing and everyone going through the gate, leaving, and you're there trying to shutter up and trying to lock up, because you did not plan properly, then, you might get caught in the storm. So we have to plan for earthquake as well. I know we had a slightly major earthquake in February. I, as a FM, was on the 9th floor of our building. And we were talking about earthquake. We were preparing. We were talking about the upcoming simulation that we're going to be doing, or earthquake drills. But as soon as I left, because I left before everyone, and entered the elevator, there was an earthquake. And from the 9th floor down to the ground floor, it was just shaking. And each floor, you could hear screams and panic, right? Luckily, the elevator didn't stop midway, went outside and was able to receive all the persons coming out. My team was on spot, to help. But as we say, to ensure our buildings are resilient, planning is very important. So we do our surveys if we're going to be doing construction. We do not areas that are susceptible to storm surges or in fault line earthquake, we try not to build there. And if we do build there because we have no choice, then we have backup plans, off-site storage, off-site operation. So if this building is damaged, then we have alternative. If it even means having a mobile, for our services. But planning is very important, and having our backups, our generator, our water tanks, our shutters, or preventive maintenance programs in place, because believe it or not, poor air quality can also cause disturbance. We have had issues where we had poor air quality because some area, the HVAC system was giving off specific odor. That could be as a result of poor servicing. And of course, we had to amend and wheel and come back again, as we would term it, to ensure that this does not happen. Because when staff walks out on you, then the operations will be disrupted, or revenue collection will be disrupted. So we have to ensure that at all times we are planning, right? And our backup systems are there. All right. So we thought that we had everything under control in terms of hurricane and earthquake and on our merry way. And here comes the surprise, COVID-19. You saw it happening in Wuhan, China, and you never thought it was going to come here in Jamaica or anywhere in the Caribbean. So you said, oh, yeah, it's there, it's far away. How far is China from here? But for Jamaica, on March 10, it was announced that we have the first case, and we have to get into action as FM. And when we're under challenges, I usually use the slogan from the Pink Panther movie, FM forever, just to continue, because even through the storm and all the challenges, you just have to press on. So yes, we had our sanitizing done. We get our sanitizers for our employees, our handheld thermometers. We had team A and team B in our facility. So whilst one team is off 1 week, team B is on, and then vice versa. We had tents because due to social distancing, our facility could not accommodate all persons who are coming into our offices. So some persons will have to be left outside. And of course, there is the sun or the rain. So we have to prepare for them in terms of, the tent. We had to put up sneeze guards, manufacturers, at least they came forward and they started building, and we had to put up our sneeze guards and separators, where we have employees sitting beside each other. We had separators and the social distancing markers. We had all of those. But in time of upheaval, we have to look down the road as to what we will do later on. So what we have done, and we have been putting in place now for forward planning, is that when we're leasing a property or when we're constructing, we have to take social distance in mind in terms of ensuring that we no longer have cluster workstations where staff are sitting beside each other. I remember about 5 years ago at an organization we got about 150 square feet of space, and it was like 12 of us. I had an office, but the staff were really huddled. So if somebody sneezed, the other person caught it. If somebody had pork the day before, what happens, right? But all of that has to change now going forward. So our layouts has to be different. We have to encourage the social distancing of minimum 4 feet apart for staff, using the sneeze guards. We are not able to be paying security guards to take temperature. We have been doing that, of course, because this is unprecedented, of course. So going forward, we'll be installing those thermometers that you can, which pretty much hands-free, right? Installing sanitizer stations. These are some of the things that we will do. Our buildings, our new renovated buildings, our newly constructed buildings will now have sneeze guards, because before we're encouraging this face-to-face, sort of communication between ourselves and customers who comes in. But that's a thing of the past. And even after COVID, we're not so sure what else will come. So we are going to be preparing for all of that. We have used lessons learned from, earthquakes and past hurricanes, and we're ensuring that our buildings, yes, are sturdier, because the forces are even stronger now. But we will continue to persevere. And like I said, FM forever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Very, very interesting thoughts about hurricanes and storms, etc., and COVID. So I have actually made some notes of questions to ask, actually. So I'm going to now hand over to Dr. Ramroop. I'm going to hand over to you. And all right, there you are.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm not seeing the attendees, but hello to everyone. I would like to say a few words on this topic through a disaster risk reduction lens. The reason being is that there were 4 main strategies from 2015-2016 that guides all United Nations member countries to put in place certain goals and targets and measure their performance against these targets with respect to these 4 main, well, if you want to use 5 main strategies. One was, of course, the disaster risk reduction Sendai strategy, right, of 2015, which guides the disaster risk reduction guidelines throughout the world. Then we had the climate change agreement, and then we had the humanitarian summit, and of course before that we had the sustainable goals. When you put all of those together in the context of how we live in this world, in this planet right now, we have to put certain overarching themes within all of those international soft agreements that countries should prescribe to and do what they have to do. And one of the key things in it is Build Back Better, right? As well as putting a lot of mitigation, right, within your infrastructure development, whether it be retrofitting or new development. And in other words, then you take into consideration what you're doing, because the overall aim is to develop a culture of resilience. Resilience in itself is a very difficult term to understand, because it means a lot of different things in different places. But as I said, looking at it through a disaster risk reduction lens, I'm glad to hear upheavals, because we're trying to remove disaster from the terminology. A lot of hazards, they do not become disasters if the governments, if the communities have enough resilience and capacity to deal with the hazards. So therefore, it's a nice word. I like it. You know, we want to remove disaster from the terminology, because when you hear disaster, you right away you get a different concept of what is happening. Now, in order to kind of quickly go through what I mean, I want to just look at an extensive risk that most of the countries of the world are experiencing, and that is flooding, right? Of course, you know the difference between extensive and intensive. An intensive risk is like an earthquake. It's a low frequency, high severity risk, right? Whereas flooding is a high frequency, low severity relatively, because we don't lose much lives with respect to the flooding. But basically, it's a high frequency. And the budgets that we spend a lot in terms of flooding, it affects many houses, many housing developments, even businesses are affected by flooding all over the world. So it's not unique to us alone. But what is important is that I remember sitting at the table in some of the OAS meetings, that is the Organization of American States in Washington, as well as the ACS, the Association of Caribbean States meeting, as well as in Geneva, in the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction. And we were developing the Sendai strategy, as well as the Sendai suite of indicators for all member states to implement within their country, to monitor these things like facility, institutional strengthening of facilities, disaster risk reduction, mitigation, and all sort of thing. And the Latin Americans kept talking about flooding as a socio-natural event, which was pretty interesting, because we were talking about natural hazards and man-made hazards, but they were saying socio-natural. And why I'm going to say that quickly as it pertains to what we are saying, is that I didn't like it initially. I didn't use the word socio-natural, but as we went on, and I was in ODPM for 6 years at the National Disaster Office as the CEO, it became more clearer what was happening with our facilities, with our housing stock, with respect to flooding in our cities and our urban centers. And basically, I just want to quickly say something, because it's important we understand resilience. If you look at the river has three main courses: an upper, middle, and lower. We all learned that in geography at secondary school, right? What we do in the hills will affect the foothills and the valleys. Especially in Trinidad, we look at the east-west corridor. Most of our towns are lined off in the valleys and the floodplains. And when you have denudation of the hillside vegetation during the crop time, we have a hot season and a dry season and a rainy season here. And we have building settlements or housing settlements in the middle course areas, right, in the valleys. One of the worst flooding we had was in Diego Martin and in Sanssouci in 2011, 2012. And a lot of the problems was people built houses on the hillsides with a lot of septic tanks. And this affected the actual problems on the hills. And when we looked at what was happening below, we saw a lot of sewer. Paving of the cities using asphalt and non-porous concrete, right? Not expanding the drainage system. Now, all of these are social issues. If we had no population in the east-west corridor, none in the floodplains, and none in the foothills, then the river would have just taken all the water that came down from the heavens, soaked it into the ground, went into your natural water courses, went into your watersheds, and then out into the sea. But since the Nile, since the Mississippi, right, since the Ganges, all the great rivers, civilizations developed around the rivers. Fertile soil, trade. Now, this you can't prevent that. It's going to happen. People are going to build, and people are going to continue having urban development and urban facilities around those rivers. So when we look at what is happening in the country, there is a difference. Now, what we're talking about resilience. What is resilience in terms of what we're having is that you can mitigate the impact of flooding. That means you are not getting rid of flooding. You can't get rid of flooding, but you can mitigate the impact. And that is not resilience even. That is just structural and non-structural mitigation. Structural mitigation, I don't have to go through that. Everybody knows that. Our facilities, how we build them. And this is what Sandra was talking about. And that's what we're talking about. We construct our facilities to cater for the risks that we're having, both extensive and intensive. We now have COVID. So there are a number of issues that we're going to have to do within our facilities to deal with COVID plus the other upheavals, which we're having all the time, like flooding, right? So one of the things you learned about COVID is that the older persons are being more affected than the younger persons. The older persons are increasing in all of our populations. The baby boomers are here, and even the insurance schemes didn't take that into consideration because we are living to 80. Before we used to live to 65 and 70. So when we begin now to retrofit our facilities, our housing stock, we have to take into consideration the protection of the vulnerable population, which includes the aged. So there are many settlements that are being developed. For example, there are a number of facilities without ramps, without areas for the visually impaired. As you get older, you do get blind, you lose some sight. So all of these things are understanding. So you can mitigate by putting in better structure. But I just want to take you to Venice and Amsterdam. These people live in the water. Their foundations are wood, not much concrete. What is really resilient there? It's not the people so much, it's the wood. Everybody go to Guyana and you buy green heart and you put it into your jetties. The green heart gets stronger as the water gets more. That is resilience. So now we have to understand, one, you could mitigate against flooding or most of your risks. You can't prevent the earthquake and you cannot prevent the flooding. The flooding will come because climate change has changed it. Instead of spraying it with a hose with nice little gentle water, it's actually dropping a bucket of water on you. So your facilities will have to understand the type of water that is coming down from the heavens is a lot more and it's faster. So even if you had no one there and that water was falling now in the current climate change, it wouldn't get enough time to soak into the soil and run off. So we're talking about mitigation in terms of facilities, in terms of your cities, your urban centers, by creating water retention pockets, by using porous concrete, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have no building code. We don't have a national building code. So one of the things that you have to look at in terms of facilities management as we go forward in a country like ours, and in some of the other countries, we have a building practice, we have building standards. And one of the things that we have is a town and country planning division, which actually monitors the building code, the building standards. And they tell you don't put a roof more than 33%. So as we come down now in terms of resilience in our facilities, we have to understand, therefore, that some of the things that we put into our building is non-structural. In other words, then the systems have to look at air quality. They will have to look at ventilation. We talked about air quality. Sandra spoke of that. You have to look at your footpaths. You have to look at your footfalls in terms of the people using it. In the little backdrop there, you'll see the elevator. I mean, that's not a joke. It's what's going to happen in your elevators. So in other words, then the non-structural mitigation is going to have a systems issue. You talked about space and use of space. There are a lot of housing in Trinidad and Tobago where we don't have the opportunity. We have a lot of windows, but we have to put a lot of burglar proof and whatever in them to prevent the bandits from coming in. People lock them during the day, so your ventilation is an issue. Having air conditions, we'll have another thing that we'll have to look at in terms of healthcare COVID. You'll have to look at, for example, your business. A lot of business now is being done in your home, so that in some of the communities, you might have to retrofit some of our businesses in terms of putting a room in your home. The old studies that we used to have is not going to cut it so much because these things will have to be retrofitted. So to cut a long story short, resilience is actually going to we'll have to teach the people in our communities. Yes, we'll be able to retrofit some of our building. Our budgets will have to change a bit, as you know. We will have to understand that within a few months' time, we will need a travel certificate to travel. Right? When you're going into some of the big airports in the UK, US, and whatever, you'll have to go through mist tunnels. After you check with your airline counter, you'll have to present your COVID negative certificate. You have to go through a mist tunnel after you go security to go into the gate. And then when you land in the country, you'll have to go through a mist tunnel again. So these are things that will have to come with COVID. And of course, I use the flooding example to tell you that no matter what you have, you will always have flooding. You cannot get rid of it. The social part, the littering part, the drainage part, the hillside part, that could be mitigated, yes. but the flooding will come because climate change is here. You'll have a bucket of water that will drop on top of you. So we now have to have buildings and facilities that will cater for that. But the most important thing is you have to teach our population that you are going to get flooding. And like the Green Heart would, you'll have to now develop education, public education, a culture of resilience within the facilities, both at the workplace, recreation, both all recreation, workplace, and sporting facilities, and your homes, to enable us to understand, the population has to understand that there will be flooding, and you're going to have to be resilient enough to adapt it. But adaptation is not resilience. Mitigation is not resilience. Resilience is understanding that you will have the black swan event, you will have the flooding, you will have the earthquake. And when it comes, you have to build back better and you have to change. The final word I have to say though is COVID. I don't know if there are much baby boomers here with me, but we used to look at a show called Jetsons. Well, COVID-19 actually embraces the fourth industrial age. It actually is going to, if you put systems in place, you might actually reduce the spread of viruses like the common cold, as well as the flu virus and other viruses, because respiratory spread is what is happening. And if we begin to take precautions within our institutions, within our facilities, within our workplaces, within our recreational places, etc., religious places especially, we will realize that you are actually going to be creating a society that is a little more healthier by putting into place what COVID-19 has brought, in a sense. So it allows us to stay home and work. It allows us to put business places in our community centers. So our community centers will now have an area where persons in the community can come and do business or work, rather than just being community centers to have a fet or to lime, as we say in Trinidad. So this is some of the things that I have in a nutshell, and how I've sort of pulled resilience using flooding as the hazard, and explaining with flooding the difference between mitigation, between adaptation and resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Amru. That's excellent. And again, I've written quite a few notes. I've written quite a few notes on what you said, especially about resilience being, expect the unexpected and build stronger. Giselle has just launched another poll. So please, whilst Ronnie speaks, if we can answer those polls, and it's a poll about resilience, which I think is going to start guiding the next set of conversations. I've also asked a question in the chat about building codes, because Dr. Amru made a point, which we all know, is that Trinidad and Tobago doesn't have a proper building code. And I just wonder about the people who come from the other countries. Jamaica, we have people from Jamaica here, we have people from Barbados here. I believe we have one of my old colleagues who is here, I think from St. Kitts. And I wouldn't mind some comments on the chat about what kind of building codes you have. Jan has already commented, so please feel free to comment. And I'm gonna hand over now to Ronnie, who's gonna probably talk a little bit more about commercial aspects, being somebody who has a lot of real estate under his care, with that is multi-tenanted, and many multinational corporations. Over to you, Ronnie.
Thanks, Eddie. Hello, everyone. Thanks to TTIFMA for inviting me to contribute here today. I thought I would focus, as Eddie said, a little bit more from the sort of commercial landlord perspective, a little bit in terms of the challenges that we've all had to endure over the last short term as well as long term. Just to give you a little perspective of where I'm coming from, RGM is one of the largest A-class commercial office real estate developers and office operators in Trinidad. We manage about 500,000 square feet of office space across 7 buildings. And we have a wide demographic of tenants, particularly commercial office space, but also some food services as well. One thing that we had to deal with, and I would go back a little further. So I know COVID is probably something that's on everyone's mind now. We spoke about earthquakes and those type of things, but I wanted to apply it to how it affects maybe commercial business directly. So since the economic downturn in 2008, we've seen how our real estate industry, commercial real estate industry, has changed. How the economic challenges have affected our tenant stock, what those tenants expect, and business in general, right? One thing we've noticed, which has been exacerbated, I think, post 2018, post 2016, the demand for office space has changed now. We've gone from a position where we typically 95 to 100% occupancy across our buildings. And even before the COVID situation, we saw where that had started to wane. People have used their office spaces differently. And of course, that presents a challenge for persons who own buildings, landlords, and even service providers for those buildings, right? The business opportunities are drying up, so to speak. COVID has obviously made it quite a more significant challenge, and it has forced us as a landlord to think about how we use our space differently to make it more marketable for persons, more effective, safer for that matter. Sandra spoke about all the initiatives she had to put in place as a result of COVID. I can certainly appreciate what she spoke about. Things I would have never thought of having to put in my building, I had to put, right? The sneeze guards as one. I mean, that's not the type of office space we are, but that absolutely became a necessity. Obviously, thermometers and sanitization stations and all those things. I mean, if you think about it, we all had to learn on the fly very quickly what the best practice would be, what would be demanded of us from our occupants to ensure that those buildings remain safe to use and so forth. So the effect was real, right? Absolutely real, and everyone had to learn quickly on the fly. In terms of those challenges, though, what I found, I've spent some time thinking about of late was what opportunities those actually would present us. So it's easy to sort of get mired in the day-to-day, and you follow the script about how things operate, be it your building, be it your organization, as the case may be. And it takes these type of crises to make you think differently. So I think we need to take advantage of sort of that retooling that we've all done as a result of a host of challenges, COVID being the latest, and determine whether or not we are actually providing a space that continually meets the needs of our occupants or customers, the public in general. The last thing I just want to touch on, because we discussed a lot already, and I certainly want to give the opportunity to people to raise questions among themselves. But one area I'd want to focus just a little on that sometimes may be missed in the midst of all these crises is the personnel that we employ, be it as building operators, be it facilities or management organizations, contractors, and so forth. There's a human element to this as well. And very often that can be lost. So I think it's important that we as managers appreciate that, understand that, and in the midst of these crises, let your solutions to the day-to-day also have some insight into how it affects the people that you are relying on to implement those solutions. How it affects them when they leave the job site and they're back home and they have to return the next day to a similar crisis situation, right? Because the only way those challenges and those crises actually get solved, actually get attended to, and we come out on the other side, is through the efforts of the teams that we employ and that we surround ourselves with. So I just wanted to touch on that at the end. Too often, I think that is something that's a miss, particularly for those who work in a built environment, you know, bricks and mortar and those types of services. The human element is sometimes missed. So that's my contribution for today. I look forward to some of the questions that may arise. Over to you, Eddie.
Okay, that's not your contribution, not yet. That's the first chapter. I'm sure we'll have questions for you as we move forward. What I'm gonna do now, I had asked a question about building codes in chat, and I got 3 responses. One from Barbados, where John says, we have a building code, but it's never been adopted officially. Most contractors follow it generally in macro, but not the micro, so they don't necessarily follow the details. Sandra in Jamaica says, we have building codes in Jamaica. The challenge is getting contractors to follow them and build in accordance. Number of breaches and authorities have their hands full. Kind of sounds like our town and country planning. And Lawrence in Ross University in St. Kitts says they're in the direct line of hurricane path, really are. And they follow the Miami-Dade County code as a benchmark minimum. Buildings are designed with reinforced concrete to withstand Cat 3 storms. And the problem they have is that low availability of materials presents significant challenges, etc. So we as a Caribbean, you know, if we extrapolate that across the Caribbean, we as the Caribbean are not there yet in terms of even building buildings, ensuring that buildings are built to a proper standard. I think in Trinidad, what we have is the responsible developers do build their buildings using international standards, but there's nothing to stop them from not doing that, and we do. So right now, I'm going to hand over to Giselle, and Giselle will, at least to start with, give us some poll responses, and then we can start with some question and answers, and Giselle and Akian will kind of lead us through that. All right, Giselle, over to you.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. As Eddie said, we were just polling you a little before the speakers began. And I think in between Eddie's handover to Ronnie. So just in terms of letting you know who's in the room, the majority of persons right now are practitioners, FM practitioners. So I think we expected as much. They are private sector. Mostly, and also in terms of just finding out a very broad question in terms of how have you been impacted, negatively impacted upon in terms of your facility due to COVID, and most of you responded with finance, right? So that also to me is to be expected. And just in terms of the poll we just shared, just open it up here. Right, we have the resilience, just asking you how you felt, because I believe between Ted and Dr. Ramroop, you know, they just sort of spoke about, you know, all these things that are going around all around us, and basically, and also Sandra, what about your readiness as a practitioner? And most of you said you're somewhat ready, so we're balancing on that line, you know, that you know, sometimes we think we could respond, other times maybe we may not have all the resources, and you feel that you can become better at it through, I guess, what we're doing here right now in terms of the shared learnings, right? Being able to find out from others, you know, how did you do what you did when you experienced that? And certainly what's going on with COVID, just sort of, you know, hearing what works, what's not working, and sort of, I don't want to say making it up, but we kind of making it up as we go along, right? Because we have no benchmark, unfortunately. So into the Q&A, because we do have one more poll we will send eventually, but Eddie would have mentioned some of the questions that were posed, which spoke about the building codes, but we also, right, we're just encouraging everyone to please share any questions. Unfortunately, you can't use your mic, but we are encouraging you to use the chat so that you'll be able to ask any questions. I do have one question for the panel generally. Just wanted to know, in your opinion, what do you think are some of the immediate measures that a facility manager, of course being someone who takes care of facility, can put in place to help their workforce to be not only more resilient, but just more productive? Because I think one of the biggest impacts right now has been on productivity. In terms of some persons are, they're celebrating the fact that working from home has made it more productive for them, but others are complaining it hasn't. So what are some of these things you think that facility managers can do for those who still have to report to the office and stuff to help, make that environment more secure? And also we have another question in terms of what technologies is everyone using to help support their building operations? So that one, Ted posted to everyone, so we're hoping to be able to get some responses, but the floor is open to our panelists to jump right in.
You might have to ask a specific person to prompt them.
Really, guys?
I don't mind sharing.
Ronnie's got it. Thank you.
Ronnie's jumping in.
I'll jump, I guess, straight to Ted's question first. Our buildings are generally somewhat automated as it is. I know that might not be the norm for all, but thankfully in recent years, even before COVID, we had a bit of a drive to improve that automation, upgrade it where necessary, because very often you put these systems in place and they're not properly maintained and their effectiveness wanes. So one area where one tool we use is our building management systems in terms of monitoring our buildings remotely. So certainly as people had to disperse and go home for work from home periods, we were able to get by with very skeleton staff on sites and use those automation tools, those monitoring tools, those remote viewing tools to get a feel for what our buildings were experiencing. Thankfully, not a lot would have changed during those times. I mean, the occupancy was so low, so the human impact on the building was lesser. So that aided in not having as much responses we have to make to the building as a result of that. So that's the primary thing we used while working from home and dealing with the COVID challenge in particular.
Actually, I can add a little bit to that. You spoke about it from the building standpoint. So from servers who manages buildings, including RGN's buildings, I have to deal with it from a staff standpoint and work process standpoint. So the guys might look at I always say guys, and they're not all guys. The FMs and the technicians might look at the building management system as a guide. Are my temperatures correct? Is the pump broken down, etc. We use CMMS software online on the phones to manage preventative maintenance cycles, schedule the work, record the work that's been done. We also use the same program for issue management where service requests come in and deal with them and record them. And we have time limits for people to respond. Of course, those time limits might be flexed a bit during COVID, especially with half-empty buildings. We then also have another software, which is just an app, which we use to track and manage HSE incidents and HSE training. So when we put somebody on a video to do some HSE training and they have to answer a questionnaire, immediately that gets logged and we have a database of HSE management within that. The CMS dovetails into the accounting system for invoicing purposes. So once a third-party contractor comes on site and issues the service report, then the invoice ties together with the fact that the service request has been closed. So we have actually ramped up the use of this type of technology, as well as putting modules into the accounting system to do things like service reports from janitors, leave reports and leave applications. So we've really worked hard to take everything out of the office and out of the paperwork stream in terms of the back office processes. Not just FM directly, but even like how am I dealing with sick leave? All right, so this is stuff that the developed world did 20 years ago, but we're now catching up. So we did a lot of this during COVID, which interestingly, to Dr. Ramru's point about resiliency, we had started going down this road not because of COVID. We started going down this road 2 years ago. And the reason we started going down this road was because we were actually trying to build some disaster management mitigation plans. What if our head office, which is our core of activities, were to be blown down by a hurricane or to get flooded out? How can we operate the business remotely without having an office? So when the COVID happened, I think we were already 70% prepared. And it was very easy for us to slip into work from home and then just start closing the gaps. So we use a gap analysis to say, how do we close those gaps? And now we're probably 90% there. We're not 100% yet, but we're getting closer. So that just adds a little bit to Ronnie. One thing I would say though, before we allow anybody else to speak, is that yes, I can. We can allow people to speak. I think is that the problem we have is that we look after buildings. All of us in the room, we look after buildings where the tenants of the buildings can work from home. So we have a client, and the client says, "I'm going to work from home 80% of the time," and they empty out the building. The thing is, even with the empty building, the FM still has to be there. Even if he can look at the parameters at home, he still has to come and do his checks. He still has to come and the janitors, the technicians, the service people who come to service the equipment, they all have to do that on site. It's very hard for them to do that outside. We have a very large janitorial staff, and I pray for them every night because they are in the front line and they're actually going into COVID-infected spaces to sanitize and hopefully sterilize. So I think that is one of the peculiarities of our business, is that our people are really on the front line. So anyway, yes, back to you, Giselle.
Yeah.
Doc.
I just wanted to answer Giselle because she focused a bit on the workforce and the productivity of the workforce, right? Yes. Giselle, are you hearing me? Yeah. Some of the work that is coming out of what's happening in what happened in China, and the modeling that they were using for their 3D model, they were using a building information modeling process. They used it in Australia, in the US, and especially in China to build that hospital in a few days, if you remember. And it was actually using a smart building design that was based on a lot of, instead of you touching knobs and whatever, it was using AI and voice activated technology. So in terms of building, you have to look at you'll have to monitor your footfall in terms of how people are moving within your buildings, in banks and in other commercial buildings. By monitoring your current footfall, you'll be able to look at your spaces and your use of the spaces. My recommendation to any of the listeners who are looking at any commercial workspaces or in critical facilities, hospitals, other commercial businesses, the first thing that you will have to do clearly, or the government will have to do first, is to go to OSH. The OSHA or the OSH departments that you have now, right? They will have to restructure their policies. They will have to look back at the COVID-19 protocol with respect to all workplaces and workforces. They'll have to go back and look at the OSH Act, right? And see if some of those things will have to be amended. So government will have to go back into the parliament, right, to look at OSH, because OSH will protect the workforce, right? Because this is very important. In terms of the actual businesses like banks and other critical sectors, you would have to now do a business impact assessment. This is what we were just talking about, Press, in terms of looking back at your assessment, doing the gap analysis, because your business impact assessment will have to be very, very intrinsically integrated with your business continuity planning. And this is what you talked about in terms of your firewalls and everything else. The the rapid interventions is what we all know has happened. Your sneeze screens and your foyers in terms of sanitization and whatever, that you know what, that has gone now. We kind of overs that now. So everybody will have that. The trick now is to incorporate resilience in the fact that you are going to get flooding in your building eventually if your buildings are in the streets where they're going to be flooding. So your early warning systems, and this is what you talked about in terms of facility managers, they're going to have to be embedded in the building in terms of smart design, in terms of monitoring the problems, such as we'll have to look at air quality drop, right? The ventilation is going to be very important in terms of going forward with COVID, in terms of how we're moving air through the facility. The spaces or elevators, how we have people, the numbers of persons, the touching of panels and air conditions and knobs and coffee dispensers and everything. As I said jokingly, Jetsons, but this is what's going to happen. It's going to happen because to keep a safe and healthy workforce who are more productive, you're going to have to do that. And then finally, I mean, it sounds very stupid, but you're going to have to look at the culture of resilience in terms of mental issues, right? And going forward, people are going to be mentally stressed when they go home. So a lot of your champions and your businesses are going to have to be mentally healthy. And that means you're looking at families, you're looking at what is happening with their children in the nursery school, are they working? So all of these issues that we tended to put away from before, you're going to have to incorporate them into your business planning in terms of your facilities management as to how people are using it. Now, there's a lot we could talk about, but I mean, in a nutshell, those are some of the structural and non-structural mitigation issues. In terms of the resiliency, it's actually going to be education, training, drills, understanding the risks, doing the business impact assessment, engaging your key stakeholders, both your internal and your external stakeholders. So those are going to be the non-structural mitigation issues, as well as resiliency. Resiliency has a lot to do with counseling and empowerment and spirituality, not religion so much, but these are the things that will have to be incorporated into the design. Over.
Thanks very much, Dr. Ramro. That was very spot on because we all know as facility managers, we're not so much in the industry for buildings, but it's for people, right? Because people are the ones who are our main concern in our everyday. So that is very spot on. We do have a question posed to our panelists, and this comes from Lawrence. Lawrence is actually based in St. Kitts. He is asking, and of course, on a Caribbean setting, he's asking if COVID-19 carries on for the next 8 to 10 months, we will face significant challenges. Is there a possibility to lobby with the relevant government agencies for easier travel arrangements for our SME service providers as borders remain closed and quarantine requirements remain in place? I don't know who want to take this one because that's a kind of big question because it's government legislation. It's talking also on the FM side in terms of the services being provided. Because usually what we happen, just to place the context, especially for TED, in the Caribbean, you have a lot of crossover of services, right? So persons may leave from Trinidad and Tobago to go and work in Barbados, from Barbados to go and work in Jamaica, and that's what we do. But right now, we have a cluster of countries who are in a bubble. Trinidad and Tobago is not in it, Jamaica is not in it, St. Lucia is not in it, because we have the spikes in our cases. But for us to get back there, I think what Lawrence is really asking, is there something we can put in place, I guess, when our numbers get a bit more controlled, for us to allow for that easier travel arrangement for our SME services? And how do we see that happening moving forward? Don't all rush at once. Yes.
All right. So I don't want to talk too much because people get bored, but in terms of just briefly, right, again, we are currently mitigating, most of the governments are mitigating structurally and non-structurally with respect to COVID spread. I'm sorry to tell my St. Lucian is that we are not going to get rid of COVID. COVID is going to be here for life. All right. Just like the flu, just like herpes, just like HIV, the virus is not going to go. It's not going to take a plane and go to Mars or something. It's going to stay here. So now that it is here, we are not structurally mitigating in terms of us. We are adapting. You see, now that's the difference between the mitigation and adaptation, just to make it clear. And any virus that comes along, we will be strong enough to deal with it. That's resilience. Those are the three, that is what I'm trying to say, okay? So what we have to do now to build resiliency is we're gonna have to face other viruses in the future. Now, in terms of what COVID is going to do, just like the 1918 pandemic, just like all the other previous viruses, it's going to fizzle out. Yes, whether we have a vaccine or not. All the vaccine will do is speed up the herd immunity. In other words, that we have been spreading this virus here in Trinidad since December and in most of the other islands. The only reason why we didn't detect it is because we weren't testing the community. And that's a factor. The thing about it is because we don't have an older population like France and Spain or whatever, those people were dying in New York. Our older population in Trinidad and Tobago, not in the 70s and 80s, they're probably home or sick or dead. What we had was a younger population. So we wouldn't get that. They were playing the carnival. You didn't have the 80-year-olds playing carnival. So this is the kind of thing that we had. So what was happening is that although we didn't test, we don't know. So it's not a problem. It would have fizzled out anyway, and it's going to fizzle out. Yes, the borders are going to reopen. Once most of the CARICOM countries have reached a sort of an agreement that you have under 20 to 25 cases per day coming in, it's reasonable to suggest that CARICOM will agree to a bubble within the Caribbean, right? And of course, I am anticipating that the way the virus is trending is that most likely between January and March, we will probably have a reopening of all international borders because the economic situation will far overwhelm the loss of just 10 to 15 lives per day. Because we are currently losing that in motor vehicle accidents, gunshots, shooting, leptospirosis, dengue, heart attacks, and all those sort of things. So the reality will kick in very soon when we have a problem with the economy. And I think that will, the challenge will happen. So yes, SMEs will be able to move very soon because I know there have already been talks about opening up the borders within the Caribbean. So I don't think we should worry too much about the travel. What I've just told you, however, is that some of the mitigation issues will be a travel certificate for COVID negative. And this is where now the governments of the Caribbean would have to not take the burden like what we have to do when we're going to get a yellow fever certificate to travel. You have to go to a health center, you have to bug up yourself. So what they have to do from now is that they have to start working with CARPHA and some of the private laboratories. They have to sit down as stakeholders and they have to decide on a price first so that it is standardized or subsidized by the government. So at $300 or $250 price is reasonable for that test because I'm telling you, once the borders begin open and you're going to hop on planes to go to any other country, within a short space of time, you're going to have to get a travel certificate saying that you're COVID negative. Now, this is one of the things, although it's not a facility management, it is a facility management in a sense, because if you run a facility that is bringing in people from abroad like an SME, you would have to present a certificate that you're free from COVID. And that will probably have to be repeated in 5 days' time to make sure that you have the antibodies if that is going to be coming up very soon. So I hope that answers your question to a certain extent in terms of the health and public safety lens.
Thanks very much, Dr. Amrup. Yes, Lauren said you did, so thank you once again. And Eddie just added the comments that he spoke to a BMS, so that's a building management system provider, who has been waiting for 6 months to go to St. Lucia to repair a facility. And that's the reality now for us, right? Okay, so at this time, we have no other questions from the chat. I'm just checking to make sure we have no raised hands. No, okay. We do have one more poll to share with everyone. And this poll was more focused on how facility managers have been treating with space usage, whether you've had to release space temporarily, permanently, maybe procure some space, depending on what your needs are. So we will be sending that out. Also, Edward says he has some questions. So Eddie, floor is yours.
Yeah. All right. I have some questions, and I want to particularly well, I wouldn't mind getting the feedback from all of the panelists, particularly the commercial ones, Ted and Ronnie and Sandra. So we talk about buildings being empty, and I know Ronnie is facing a situation where some of his tenants are saying, I'm giving up space. All right. I'm in a situation right now where I'm ready to take our head office and make it smaller, because I think for the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to be working from home a lot. So we're going to make it smaller. We're going to give up space. So how do you deal with that in the instance? Okay, you may say, well, I can get more tenants, but maybe you won't get more tenants. So is it that we start do like what the airline industry did and start mothballing buildings, or we mothball certain floors in buildings? And what sort of plans would be in place if we had to start reducing usage of buildings in terms of how we maintain them, so they don't lose value? So for example, when COVID first came out, all the malls shut down and we heard stories about this, the malls shutting down in the States, and they would come back in and found mold and mildew on all the other products. We kept air conditioners running here, but that is not feasible over the long run. So what has anybody given any thought to that? Ted in particular, would mind hearing what your thoughts are. And then the part two of that discussion might be what Dr. Ramu talked about, the immediate response, the sneeze guards, the spray, hand sprays, the sinks we put in front of the buildings, which, as he said, we're over that now, correct? Within 2 weeks, we were over that. And now we're looking at how do we make the air quality in the building better through UV. We did a webinar about UV and whatnot, and things like touch-free doors that are more expensive, where they open automatically, etc., which are more long-term systemic changes to the buildings. How do you balance that cost implication with the fact that your building might be emptier and therefore your budgets might be smaller, because there may be less people to pay the bills? So that's a balancing act, I think, that we have to do on a case by case. So I wanted to get some comments. Ted, Ronnie, and Sandra. Yeah.
Sure. I'll jump in. I've been quiet for a while. So it's a universal, global conversation that you're bringing out. IFMA, supported by the communities over the summer, did a Delphi survey, basically saying, what is next year going to look like? What is our new workplaces going to look like? What about the technology? What about workplace design changes, mental health? How would you interact with HR and sustainability? So there's 3 primary topics, and a lot of the questions that have to do with what's our footprint going to look like? How much square footage are we still going to have? We had 420 subject matter experts literally from all over the world respond. Some of the findings were surprising. Some were kind of, I think, what we expected, but we were hoping for validation on. Over 70% of corporate facility managers and corporate real estate managers indicated they didn't see a shift in the size of their real estate portfolio. They weren't going to downsize, they weren't going to upsize, they were going to keep their footprints. What they were going to do was have a permanently flexible workforce to support that. We're keeping our same 500,000 square feet, 100,000 square feet, 2 million square feet, whatever it is, but we've learned that people can work from home in certain positions very successfully, and we're going to do that. So I think the vast majority of the respondents on the corporate side anyway did say probably met. Looking at some of the recent financial data that was put out by the big facility service providers, seems to support that in terms of have there been any mass exoduses? No. Have there been any mass acquisition? No. It's really, I think, going to be, we're going to have to change what we do in conjunction with IT and with HR on how we support a much more agile and flexible workforce. I think that's a very strong reality. I think for the rest of the verticals or building types, it's a very different answer. I think people that are operating shopping malls and large hotels have a big right to be concerned right now. From the feedback from the large national global operators, they're concerned. They're concerned about vacancies. They're concerned about a lot of big box bankruptcies and just flat out going out of business. And it's not just one geography, it's all over the world. So I think Seen some interesting adaptive reuse proposals come into play, especially when more in North America for some of our shopping malls, that because we've had multiple big box retailers basically shut their doors, those big box facilities are now getting repurposed into mini distribution centers. We're going to need to figure out how to do more of that because, you know, with the change, especially hospitality, especially with retail, there's going to be some shift there, I think, for sure. Finally, looking at maybe it's a bright spotlight, you know, and all the challenges that we're having is the projections by, again, an amalgamation of the big four is we're short 1 billion square feet of warehousing and distribution facilities in the United States and Canada right now. 1 billion square feet. The construction is going crazy. We've shifted, we've gotten used to working from home and having things delivered. Soon we'll have drones dropping things on our front porch. It's gonna happen. You know, there's another shift there. So I think essential services, nothing's really gonna change. Office seems to be steady state. And I think, you know, really, we're going to have to be clever. We're going to have to work with, you know, local governments, with other peers in terms of doing what the heck do we do with that shopping center where, you know, we just had 1 million square feet of vacant. I mean, we have to do something with it. And it's, you know, it's only a 5-year-old building. You know, what do we do with that? So there's some comments back.
Sandra.
Yes.
Sandra,
Right, I'm here.
how do we connect experience?
Well, for us, I have not seen a reduction in real estate, in our real estate inventory. Actually, we have an allocation in every parish in Jamaica, and we collect government taxes. We collect the taxes, so persons do need to come in and pay. Since COVID, we have automated some of our services and we have them online for persons to, you know, use the service online. But we find that persons in the, you know, over 50 years of age, they rather to come into the offices instead of going online. They don't trust anyone to do their taxes online for them. So they actually come in. So we're actually looking for more space, or we're expanding. And in terms of expansion, we have to have more staff in, and that's why we have to, you know, amend our layout so that we can encourage social distancing. And that's why we had the sneeze guards and all of that. Some of our operations, yes, persons are working from home, but of course, you know, FMs has to be there. You know, our way of motivating them is to sort of come up with some reward and recognition program, you know, at least to encourage them, because yes, they are vulnerable. They are in the sensitive area where there are a large crowd, you know, and they are sanitizing and they are exposing themselves. So, you know, we have to keep them going and keep them safe by providing PPEs, you know, for them. But we are not reducing, you know, pretty much constant, even though we are, you know, our services are online. Persons still rather, you know, come, they stand up in line, they stand up in the sun outside waiting, because based on our regulation, only 20 persons, 15 or 20 persons, depending on, you know, the spike, are allowed in a building. And then on a given morning at 8:30, you will have, you know, up to 60 persons, you know, at our office. So we have to have, you know, additional waiting area space outside. So in some areas, yes, we have to plan, we have to expand, or we use tents, but there are no shifts in real estate at all in terms of reduction, even though persons are home. Right?
What do you see in the US of Jamaica, like in the corporate real estate and the and like the big like the insurance companies and the banks and whatnot? You see any trend towards reductions or the same kind of situation as yours?
Similar situation when you see the banks, you see, you know, the long lines outside. They too are online in most regards, and they have maybe possibly increased some of their banking fees just to discourage persons from coming in. But you still have persons who are not yet warm to the whole online facility, so they're rather to be there. But yes, I've not seen any closure of, you know, branches, any significant. If there are closures, maybe insignificant for me to even notice. But The banks encourage, insurance company encourages online, because even when I'm doing my insurance, I did it fully online, credit card, and they send a certificate to you. But you still, I've been by one of the offices and it still has persons there. So it will get there. I don't know with us spiking to, I know, I think we have about 6,000 cases and 101 deaths. I don't know if, things will change eventually where persons know that they have to stay home. But for now, as FMs, we just have to rise to the occasion. We can't have them in the rain. We can't have them in the sun. So we have to ensure that they're covered and protected and gently try to encourage them. The online is nice to come from home, but persons miss the social interaction. That's one of the main things that persons complain about. Because I'm a member of Kiwanis Club, and yes, we do talk to, I suppose most of my members are over 60, and they do tell you they're retired and they want to go out because with this isolation and quarantine, yes. So going to the tax office or going to the bank is one way of meeting people. So they want to go. How we mitigate that? I'm not so sure for now.
Thanks, Sandra. I think Ronnie wanted to say something.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Ted raised, as well as Sandra, which might be a bit of a real world experience on our side here, and that you might think might run counter to what you expect. We've had some vacant space for in excess of a year, right? I'm talking about from last year back. Difficult to get it rented out, and obviously we prefer tenants of a larger size, 10, 20, 30,000 square feet of spaces is the type of office space that we want to market and tenant out. And coming to the end of last year, as the economy is sort of grinding down and slumping a bit, nothing has been happening. We've been, almost, I don't want to say we were in a panic, but we assumed that this was going to be a trend that was going to last for a while, because we've been maybe 12, 18 months of marketing and nothing happening. Surprisingly to us though, as we got into this year and even through the COVID period or whatnot, all of a sudden we signed, I think it was 4 new tenants in the first 7 months of the year, which is quite unusual. From coming out of a period of maybe 12 to 18 months of no interest. Now, what was different though, is obviously we weren't getting the 30,000 and the 20,000 square feet of space. We were getting more people though, who were interested in smaller spaces. So maybe that speaks to a bit of the COVID experience, whereby business operators are deciding to use space differently, not give it up entirely, because not all businesses could run from home to perpetuity, right? You need an official place of business. Sometimes you need a place to see your customers. To Sandra's point, we're social animals. People want to come out and be among people, right? So while we may have had concerns that tenancies were just trending down, some of that driven from in our jurisdiction because of how the petrochemical industry is moving and gas prices and oil prices slumping. That's what we were looking at as a future trend, but now we're seeing a bit of an uptick, even in a period of a pandemic, which was quite a surprise to us. Are we where we want to be? No, but for 2020, we're actually filling space, which is good. So, I mean, just to Ted's point and Sandra's point, I thought I'd add that.
Very, very interesting statistics. I think what will be worth it out of all of this, hopefully we're all tracking these things, because they'll be very interesting papers and, presentations to hear, all these things that transpired during this time. I just wanted to share some of the comments that were placed in the chat and in response to the survey. So the last survey we just sent out was about space. And just asking very broadly once again, have you had to make significant changes to your workspace? The majority said yes. And what was that? What were some of those changes? So the leading thing right now is, of course, the development of work from home policies, which I think we expected. Right after that, we have persons have had to temporarily release space. And then running right after that, it's a mixture of no changes to permanently releasing space. So that's the sort of feedback we got from the chat. We have Lawrence is sharing with us saying that more stable companies would be looking for space as physical distancing becomes a core requirement. And Sandra, you mentioned that because the more people that want to come to your facility, come to your company, you have to make sure you're in compliance with what the requirements are. Also, David shared because there was an option in the survey for you to choose other if there was something else that you had to do in terms of space, and he said they looked at voluntary occupancy after their restrictions were listed. David, we don't know what country you're from, so maybe you can let us know. But remote working is still happening. We are 350 staff. Now we have only approximately 45% of that staff coming in, and they've reverted to flexible hours or working remotely 100%. So they've done things like hot desking as well to help out. So very interesting strategies that persons are putting in place. Carolyn also shared that they've had to erect a lot of plexiglass screens to shield customer service staff and are now contemplating plexiglass, for the back office spaces as well to shield staff. So yeah, so it's to me it's very interesting because we're all for the open plan, right? Open plan has been everything, and it's almost like we're reverting to cubicles in a way. I just think that is very, very interesting. And oh yeah, so David is from Cayman Islands, right? Okay, yes. So and Carolyn is from Bermuda. So thanks very much, guys, for sharing that feedback. So it's good for us to get a really wide Caribbean perspective.
Lovely.
And as I said, Lawrence is Trini, but based in St. Kitts. So we also have that perspective.
Right.
Yes, Eddie.
I think we never really got into we talked about the first part of my question, but we never really got into the second part, which is the more long-term mitigation factors of that Dr. Ramrup had initially raised about. And I know we looked at it from an engineering standpoint in terms of air quality improvements and touch-free, etc. And I mean, to Ronnie's point, where he's saying he saw reduction in space utilization with economic downturn, maybe more than space utilization issues. With economic downturn, how do people see the investment in that type of those type of mitigation tools being feasible now versus I don't think I know many people who have done the UV type thing on the air conditioners for better air quality. I think one set of buildings put in some touch-free doors. Many are kind of just wait and see, taking a wait and see approach. I don't know what is happening elsewhere. Maybe some of the other participants could talk about what's happening in their countries. Maybe Ted, I don't know if that's happening a lot in the US, but I'm kind of curious about what sort of investments are happening in that area.
Was that for me? Could you repeat the last part, please? Yeah, mute.
Yeah. So basically, Dr. Ramrup talked about some of the mitigation strategies in terms of improving air quality in buildings, and I raised the issue of things like touch-free doors and so on. And we actually had a webinar a couple of months ago about improving HVAC air quality for COVID, and the use of UVC is one of the tools that was recommended. And so I was just wondering, are US companies or US buildings adopting those types of longer term strategies that require a little more investment? So Dr. Ramrup talked about how do you make a building more resilient to anticipate these things in the future when it is an investment that has a cost way out in terms of economic downturn that we're facing now, and how and what are the trends that you see happening in the US?
In the US, okay, so I'm gonna give you a two-part answer, I think. So part of what it's a good question to do with is what we're referring to as the digital divide. One of the things that we've learned very early on, both from an education and a work perspective, that approximately 25 to 30% of our population did not have sufficient technology to efficiently either work from home or go to school from home. I think that's part of the resilience needed for any corporate culture, any society. And I think we've learned that very quickly. I don't think we've fixed it completely yet. We've seen those with budget, and it really is a financial issue, those with budget have been able to make great strides. That's not our whole country. We're still very much running behind in certain sectors. Trust me, if you work for Google, you're fine. But if you're in a different industry, if you're a back office worker for a mid-sized insurance company, and you're in the middle of the country or in the Southeast, you probably have a problem. I think looking at adjusting our thinking about what base requirements are has shifted exponentially because of the reliance on technology. Quite frankly, there's pockets that are very, very good in our country, and there's pockets that are just really not at all. I think from looking at a more physical workspace scenario, if I understood the question right again, how does that work? How do we create those standards? How do we create those best practices? I can tell you for multi-state, multinational companies operating in the US, it's very confusing. There are literally different requirements on how to operate, not just in every state, but in every county, in every city, in every state. It is almost impossible to know what exactly to do. You can create general guidelines, but some of the national portfolio managers that we've interviewed and had on webinars and had chats with, they have to take some kind of judgment call on how they're going to operate. Regardless of use of the facilities. That's been very challenging from a U.S. perspective. California is not the same as Arizona, and guess what? Within Arizona, every single county has a slightly different rule, and we're a small state by comparison. So how do you take this lack of consistency at a government level and pull together a plan that you can use to operate your facilities, work with your HR, work with your IT groups, with your vendor partners to effectively manage? I think I'll wrap up with one thought, and then I thought it was a really good one. So we all used to travel. We all possibly have our own favorite travel brands. I mean, I'm a Hilton guy. It just happened, Hilton has 26 different brands at different price points within their portfolio, ranging from a Hampton Inn all the way up to a luxury collection. It's one company, one brand, a lot of franchises, a lot of moving parts. They've adjusted their service delivery, even though it's a single brand, based on the type of facility, the budget for the facility, and the regionality of the facility. I think we need to be thinking like that in this country, and we haven't really got there yet. Some are doing a great job. Most are really struggling. So I hope that gave you some commentary on your question.
Yeah. Anybody else want to weigh in on that question? Ronnie?
I would say, Eddie, in terms of the, I mean, you raise this, you have UVAC and automatic doors and sort of capital investment into sort of rejigging your office space to be more resilient going forward. I think the challenge for us and perhaps as a landlord who in part may have to saddle those costs, the the other half of it is what level of confidence that may or may not provide to your tenant stock. So for instance, we have a major tenant who has taken a decision to pretty much shut down and work from home, right? They haven't given up space per se, but their staff are completely working from home pretty much since April. I'm not certain that a significant investment into my HVAC system at this point is necessarily an incentive for them to come back. So kind of maybe to Ted's point, but looking at it from a company perspective, each of our tenants may have an internal policy that will dictate whether they choose to occupy a space, 50%, 25%, 75%, and that may change going forward as the crisis improves or gets worse. So we need to weigh that very carefully against what we're investing in to make the space safe and resilient, and whether the knock-on effect is actually going to be to the benefit of all the tenants of the building. Because it could be a lost investment in the short term. And in these economic tight times, you know, we need to be looking at every penny, quite frankly. And there may be lower hanging fruit that we can take advantage of that might actually have a bigger impact in the short to medium term than, you know, a shiny, fresh new piece of tech that not everyone is necessarily enamored with or understands, quite frankly. That's going to make them change how they use space. So that's where we are now. All those things are things we are thinking about. I don't know that we're in a position yet to say, yeah, that's a great idea, we're going to pull the trigger at this point in time. It's still a bit of wait and see, quite frankly.
I think the same kind of thought occurs about where Dr. Ramu talked about things like flooding, etc., and building retention ponds, or in our case in Trinidad, actually just capturing the water to use it, etc. But whereas the trade-off of do we invest or do we not invest is something that we haven't yet completely come to terms with, I think, you know. So yeah. Giselle, can I hand back to you in terms of just going back through the chats? And I see David Drummond has a comment there. Giselle seems to be missing in action. So David talked about investing in touch-free technologies, and David, if you recall, is from the Cayman Islands. Hands-free temperature devices for facial recognition, hands-free, touch-free, touchless equipment in recreational areas and bathrooms. I think some of us have the bathrooms already. Custodial teams, we purchase sprayers and ionization tech, so larger areas can be sanitized better. We occupy 3 45K square foot towers over 3 floors, including cafeteria, etc. Upgraded the BMS, finally increased the use of occupancy management system, called office space software to manage space using hot desking management, security access, office service, and maintenance requirements met. So I think that's a very good example of the types of ways to use technology to improve. So, and Ronnie says, yes, that's where we are. So can I ask the panelists for closing comments around the table? And I think we've spoken about a lot of things. And quite honestly, I have questions that I could ask that could take us for another 3 hours. But because it's such a wide topic. But maybe I could just because we now at 7:30, 6:30, maybe I could ask for closing comments from the 4 panelists, and then we move from there. Ted?
We've covered a lot of ground. I think a couple of things occur. So I mentioned that Delphi survey that came out. The initial summary is available now. I think it's a good read. I think it's a guideline. I think it's not a perfect roadmap for what next year is going to look like, but I think there's good insights that we can all benefit from. So definitely suggest take advantage of that, download it if you didn't see the email. It's certainly available. I personally like to hear your feedback on it. You know, was it useful? Is it giving you any consistency from what you're seeing in the Caribbean? I think beyond that, it would be silly not to say this, but this is a global family, and I think we've come together in a way that it really kind of is remarkable in terms of some of the cross communication across all verticals, across all chapters, and I think we did something as an association as all our COVID content is free for the world. So thanks to everything that you've done, and we'll keep doing.
Thanks so much, Ted. Dr. Ramrup.
Okay, I thought I was going after Sandra, but no. As the doctor in the bunch, I would just like to thank you all. I would like to say that it's not one size that fits all. That is an important concept going forward. It's going to be different strokes to different folks. There are CDC guidelines and WHO guidelines and government guidelines as to what you need to put into your buildings to make them more health and safety and public health. You need to follow that. It's for restaurants, it's for apartment buildings, for whatever. That is very important in terms of my perspective and in terms of my lens. You have to at least have the basic. In terms of going forward, in terms of resiliency, I'm just going to reinforce the messaging. That is your team, both your internal what we could say customers and the external customers. You need to strengthen their perspective with respect to all hazards, all upheavals. Anything can happen at any time. And I think that is what you need to strengthen your workforce in a psychological way. You need to build a culture of resilience. You can't build resilience. You have to build a culture of resilience. And that is very important to understand, and to have your workforce to become stronger is to be able to understand that going forward. It's a spiritual issue. It's something that allows your workforce to come together. You have subliminal messaging, make them healthy, keep them at work, but at least that is to me the most important thing going forward with respect to the COVID-19 impact on what we are doing normally and what we expect to happen in the next few years in terms of our extensive risks. That is the flooding, etc., and our intensive risks, because in Trinidad and Tobago, we could have an earthquake at any time. So that's basically how I'd like to summarize my perspective.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing it back to all the risks, because even though we started talking about all upheaval, we still had a tendency to kind of hone in on what's right in front of us, which is the COVID, and it's good. But I appreciate you bringing us back out to the all the upheavals. So Sandra.
Yes. Well, we're in unprecedented times, and yes, we spoke about it, these different disasters that we have been preparing for. But COVID is it requires a new paradigm shift. Information is there. I know we are playing it by ear, doing the wait and see and all of that. But apart from CDC and WHO, as Dr. would mention, the IFMA forum, because I'm signed up for it, and there's some useful information from there. The whole thing about the sneeze guard, persons would have tried it and they spoke about it. The different types of filters that you can use on your HVAC system, the MERV and the HEPA filter, and persons would have asked various questions on that forum and get answers. So this forum is quite useful, the webinar, but that forum also can be an extension of what we learned here, because it's useful information. I use it as a guide in terms of, things that I want to implement. I will ask questions as well, or what do you do here? It's mainly persons from the US, but, since they have been the game changers, when we go to the IFMA conferences, and since we missed Chicago this year, at least there are some lessons to be learned. But to be resilient, we just have to continue to persist and keep changing, as we plan forward for the next 2 years. All right, thank you.
And Ronnie? final a closing remark?
Sure. I'll put my FM hat on, perhaps, and say what I think. I think it's important for us to treat FM, particularly in these times, as true service delivery, and stay close to our customers if we want to keep them, customers and tenants in my instance, and find out what they need from their business, for their businesses to be successful. And it's often not a lot. They need to know that we're there to support them, and it'll come back to us afterwards. They will remain a tenant for a longer period of time. They remain a customer for a longer period of time when they know that you've supported them in a time of crisis. Not all businesses have sort of the reach that FM has in terms of maybe this particular pandemic and understanding what needs to be done and should be done. So it's an opportunity for us to sort of educate our customers, kind of sometimes tell them what they don't need, what they don't know they need, and be in a position to offer it. And in that way, I guess, build some resilience going forward.
Excellent, excellent. There actually was a question by Cindy, and I'm not sure she's still here, one or two people had to leave, where she said, quick question for Ronnie, do you anticipate the price of commercial real estate leases going up or down over the next 3 to 5 years, given the measures? I know we did closing comments, but because she had specifically asked that question, what do you think in that respect?
In our experience, certainly at the moment, we are our rates are flat, if not going down, just out of a necessity of keeping tenants in the building, particularly those who may be in a position for renewal or coming to the end of a lease term and preparing to renegotiate. I don't think it's wise to assume someone is just going to be upward rent increases going forward. That's not going to be sustainable, particularly at this time. So I would imagine we'd be pretty much flat for the next couple of years, easy. I think as maybe we come out of this tough time and tenants' need for space actually might start to inch up a bit, that may drive some increases in the rates of the market. But I mean, it's not the late 90s and early 2000s with gas and oil prices through the roof and people fighting for office space. That's just not the environment we're in right now. So we have to make it attractive for them to be in the building. So yeah, I think that's where we are.
Okay, thanks a lot. Sandra made a good point about using the IFMA forum portal and the IFMA website as a resource. They have loaded up a lot of really good webinars, a lot of good content, a lot of good papers. There's day-to-day discussion chat groups as panels where people ask specific questions and get advice. It is one of the very big benefits we get from being members of IFMA. So for a lot of the guests who are on the call, I'm encouraging you to go and join IFMA and join a chapter. Once you're within a geographic area, that will allow you to join a chapter. And hopefully more chapters will be forming in the Caribbean very soon. I know Ted and Aki are very much keen on doing that and making that happen. And we've just got news last week that World Workplace, for those who don't know, is the annual conference of facilities management from the International Facilities Management Association. And therefore, a lot of us tend to try and go every year or every other year because there's a lot of learning that happens and networking that happens in that forum. This year, it has just been announced that it's going to be going virtual because they were still trying to, had been trying to host it in December, but it's going to be going virtual. So I'm going to encourage everybody, if you join it, join a chapter, sign up for workplace. And I'm going to